Good morning, everyone, and thanks a million for joining this presentation, this early presentation. My name is Stecy Yghemonos. I'm the director of an umbrella organization called EuroCarers. And the job of my organization is to convey the voice of family, informal, unpaid carers from across Europe at European level. The objective of my presentation this morning is to give you an overview of the situation and needs of carers across Europe, but also to try and shed light on the entry points that exist in the EU policy agenda to try and address those needs and to hopefully improve the life of millions of carers across EU member states. Let me share my presentation with you. There you are. So, first of all, maybe allow me to say a quick word about my organization. We are based in Brussels. We are an umbrella organization, so we are a European network of national and regional organizations. Our network currently brings together 71 organizations from 26 countries, including Sweden, of course. So Carers Sweden is a prominent member of our network and has been a member for a long time. And we have a close collaboration with numerous stakeholders, but also we were lucky enough to sign a partnership agreement with the European Commission in 2014, which was renewed a few years ago. And as a result of that, we are consulted on a regular basis by EU institutions, so not only the Commission, but also the European Parliament, about numerous policy developments or policy initiatives which may have an impact on the daily life of carers. So needless to say that we try and use that to also bring new topics to the agenda. And I should also mention that half of our member organizations are research organizations or universities, so we are also able to collect and generate new data and information about the situation and needs of carers, and to convert that into achievable, hopefully, or at least evidence-based policy recommendations. So what do we know about the situation of informal carers across Europe? And everything I'm going to mention now is actually based on either data or research collected by EU institutions themselves or research funded by the EU institutions. Well, first of all, we know that informal carers are actually the main providers of long-term care in Europe. According to some estimates, as much as 80% of all long-term care in Europe is actually provided by families, friends, and neighbors. We also know that based on a broad definition of informal care, which is the definition we use, that is, carers are people who provide usually unpaid care to someone with a chronic disease, a disability, or any other long-lasting care needs outside of a professional context. So based on this definition, we estimate that between 10 and 25% of the EU population, but I mean closer to 10%, are actually involved in caregiving. So that's a substantial number of people, a significant number. Now, we also know that the gender dimension of informal care is also extremely significant. A typical carer in Europe is a woman, and when it comes to the age group, it's usually a woman between 45 and 75 years old. So it's based on these figures and the prominence of the group and the significance or the prevalence of informal care in Europe. It is already pretty impressive and pretty difficult to avoid the discussion about the central role played by carers in Europe. When it comes to the economic value of informal care, which is an angle that that is difficult to avoid these days, and I'm afraid it's going to be even more difficult to avoid in the coming months, given the looming crisis, economic crisis emerging from the COVID pandemic. We know that depending on the member states, the economic value of informal care is estimated at between 50 and 90% of the overall cost of formal long-term care. We also know, based on a study published by the European Commission in 2018, that if we were to try and replace informal carers by formal care, so by professional care, that would entail an increase in the share of GDP devoted to long-term care by 130% on average for the EU. So again, based on this slide, what this slide shows is that whether we like it or not, it is going to be extremely difficult to replace informal carers altogether, and so there's no way around informal carers. As a matter of fact, if we want to maintain our long-term care systems in place and move towards even more universal access to long-term care. So informal carers are central in the provision of care in Europe, and they should be at the table when it comes to discussions regarding the future of care systems. When it comes to the prevalence of informal care per gender and per age groups, just to illustrate what I was telling you before, so you can see that the prevalence starts to grow as of 35, and particularly for women, and up until the age of 65, I mean, people tend to assume caregiving responsibilities. When it comes to the breakdown of the prevalence by country, by member state, you can see that there's a significant proportion of the population involved in caregiving across Europe, with some particularly striking figures for some countries. I'm thinking about France, for example, or Belgium. When it comes to Sweden, as you will see, the proportion according to this table, which, by the way, is based on a study developed by an EU agency called Eurofound, based in Dublin, and that agency focuses on working and living conditions in Europe. As I was saying, the figure for Sweden is slightly under the number that's currently used by our member organizations and colleagues in Sweden, which, if I'm not mistaken, is at around 1,300,000 carers. So what that demonstrates is that even though it's great to have efforts by EU institutions and EU agencies to look into the situation of carers across Europe, more can be done to actually collect relevant and reliable data about the situation, about their number, and so we need to push there as well. The other interesting aspect in this table is the fact that they have decided to divide the number of carers by working carers and non-working carers. And this is extremely important, of course, because that allows us to maybe try and highlight the potential correlation between caregiving and access to employment. We know also, based on research, that caregiving is very often a barrier to employment, or at least full-time employment. And so it is also interesting maybe to look in the future into how we could make sure employment services are aware of the situation of carers, and potentially how caregiving can hinder carers in their attempt to join the labor market, and how they can maybe help address those barriers. Now, when it comes to the impact of caring on carers themselves, and again, this is based on research, there's a clear correlation between caregiving and, as I was saying, access to employment, or at least work-life balance. So many carers tend to reduce their working hours or drop out completely from the labor market. And again, this is particularly striking when it comes to female carers. Many women tend to reduce their working hours, and that has an impact, of course, on their pension, and on the gender pay gap, and the pay gap generally in Europe. A lot of carers as well, many carers tend to contribute financially to the costs of caregiving. So they tend to chip in terms of medication, in terms of access to professional care services, in terms of home adaptation, for example, when it comes to dependent people or people with a disability. And as a result, plus the fact, what I was telling you before in terms of reducing working hours, that leads to poverty and social exclusion, because many carers find themselves completely isolated. Finally, also based on research, we know that caregiving has a huge impact on carers when it comes to health, so both physical and mental health. And just to illustrate this, for example, the prevalence of mental health issues among non-working carers is 20% higher than among non-carers. So again, it shows how how negative the impact of caregiving on carers may be, and as a result, that leads to a vicious circle where carers themselves become patients. And that, of course, also has a cost for society, and it should be addressed. This is another table illustrating the few aspects I just mentioned, but I thought it would be useful to include it in my presentation because it's based on a fairly recent study by the same EU agency I mentioned before, so Eurofound. So this table dates back from 2018. So when you look again at the situation of carers, divided by non-carers and working carers and non-working carers, you see that when it comes to carers generally, the situation is worse when it comes to their self-perception of their own health, when it comes to poverty, when it comes to them being in the lowest income quartile, so they are worse off than the general population. The feeling of loneliness, the fact that many of them feel that the value of what they do is actually not recognized by society or by others, according to the social exclusion index, and in terms of life satisfaction. So there again, I thought the very interesting aspect in this table is the fact that you see that within the group of carers, when you look at the detail and the difference between non-carers, working carers, and non-working carers, when it comes to working and non-working carers, you see that working carers actually seem to do better than non-working carers. So this seems to indicate that the possibility for carers to at least maintain an active professional life acts as an enabler, at least, to improve their well-being and their general situation. So this is another important element which I think we should include in our message. Just a quick word, of course, it's impossible to avoid the topic on the impact of the COVID crisis on care and caring in Europe. Well, until the crisis, started, most of the discussion regarding care and caring really focused on the impact of demographic aging and the growing prevalence of chronic diseases and age-related diseases. But of course, the debate about the crisis brought back the idea that epidemics could actually have a huge impact on care systems in Europe, and that probably we need to adapt our systems to that as well. When it comes to COVID itself, it has created challenges for our systems which we have, not seen for generations. And I think, when it comes to the situation, or at least based on the data we are gradually collecting via the network, our network, well, it has done nothing but exacerbate the situation of carers again across European member states in terms of isolation, in terms of the intensity of the care provided. We have data emerging from various member states showing that many carers feel they are providing more care than before the crisis, that their access to professional services and support measures when in existence has been severely limited or reduced, or even has disappeared altogether as a result of the crisis. And so that is really exacerbating the pre-existing challenges facing carers. And so we are obviously in the process of documenting this and informing the Commission about the situation of carers as much as we can, so that their needs, can be taken into consideration in future measures and in the long run. When it comes to the positive impact of COVID on the, at least, policy dialogues regarding care and caring, I think it is important to mention that, the way we see it, at least, it seems the whole discussion about respective responsibilities when it comes to the provision of care between individuals, families, and public authorities is back on the table, and so that offers a lot of opportunities for our message when it comes to the support and recognition of carers. So what is it that carers actually want? Well, actually, there's quite a lot of data about that as well, and there's a big European survey actually that was carried out by the European Commission. I think it was in 2013. So this is a list of asks by carers themselves and carer organizations by order of importance. So that's obviously also extremely interesting. First and foremost, what carers want is financial support. Of course, caregiving is a cost in terms of the opportunity cost, carers not being able to access good quality employment, but also, as I was saying before, because a lot of them tend to contribute financially. So they want to be supported, they want to be recognized and compensated for the contribution they provide to care systems and to society as a whole. They also want to have access to good quality employment. So we need flexible working conditions for carers, but also access to paid and or unpaid leave, with a preference when it comes to our network, of course, to paid leave. We also need, or carers also need, pension credits for the caregiving they provide. It is only normal for carers who sometimes spend months or years providing care to see that time recognized in the calculation of their pension. And again, this is particularly important for women. because of course caregiving, not only to people in need of long-term care, but also in the context of childcare, for example, is a clear driver of the gender pay gap in Europe. So this should be addressed urgently. Carers also want to have access to regular breaks when you are a carer, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, again, you need from time to time to be able to take a weekend or to take, you know, a few hours to meet a friend, to go to the movies, or you know, to have a drink, you know, with your social network, you know, and that's essential if you want to make sure that you are able to continue to provide care in the long run, and to ensure that you will not collapse at some point. Last but not least, carers also need to have access to information and training. Many carers become carers overnight. They haven't chosen to become carers. You know, someone becomes ill in the family, or you know, sometimes or just requires long-term care needs, and then someone in the family or in the social network has to take over and assume caregiving responsibilities without knowing anything about the condition they have to deal with on a daily basis, or about even their rights when they exist. So so it is important to ensure carers have access to basic information about the needs of the care recipients, but also about their rights when they exist, and have access to training to help them improve the quality of the care they provide, and to ensure they are able to maintain a good, you know, a good quality of social life and a healthy lifestyle as well. Training can also be potentially important to recognize the skills and validate the skills developed by carers while caring. It is important because, of course, it holds a lot of potential in terms of allowing carers to go back to the labor market at some point. You know, many carers develop sometimes very technical skills while caring, and so that could be valued or validated, and again allow carers to you know, to access good quality jobs once their caregiving responsibilities are over. Now, based on this data and on this information about the situation and needs of carers, what are the entry points available to us, to our network, but also to our you know, movement, to make the case for more support for carers and more recognition? Well, a few years ago, in 2017, the Commission, probably in an attempt to, quite frankly, counterbalance the negative impact of the economic crisis and the fact that at the time, most of the discussions, you know, policy discussions were focusing on the economic side of the Union, decided to introduce a new proposal called the European Pillar of Social Rights. European Pillar of Social Rights is always full of EU jargon, which is sometimes a bit daunting, but actually the pillar is fairly simple to understand. It consists of 20 principles about the social rights that should be accessible to all citizens across the EU and across member states. And as you will see, many of these rights, which are listed on this slide, have relevance for the daily life of carers. So I've only highlighted a few here. So when it comes to number one and when it comes to number one on access to education, training, and lifelong learning, but also number 11 on childcare and support to children. These two principles are extremely relevant when it comes to the issue of young carers. Young carers are often disregarded in policy dialogues about care and caring, for the simple reason that when data is collected about carers across Europe, people or administrative services tend to focus exclusively on people of working age, because obviously the angle through which these questions are addressed are always focused on productivity and access to employment. And when it comes to children or young people, it's much more difficult to capture the situation through those tools and surveys and data collection processes. Obviously, other principles in the pillar are relevant to our work on gender equality, on equal opportunities, as I try to highlight and hopefully successfully highlighted in my previous slides. Informal care is often a barrier to equal opportunities for many carers across Europe. When it comes to work-life balance, but I'll get to that in my next slide. When it comes to access to minimum income, when it comes to the recognition of the central role played by carers in long-term care systems generally. Now, when it comes to the work-life balance, the possibility for carers to maintain a good quality of life and to strike a balance between their caregiving responsibilities and their professional responsibilities, following the approval, the proclamation of the Pillar of Social Rights, 2 years after its introduction, so very recently in 2019, the Commission actually introduced the idea of an EU directive on work-life balance for parents and carers. This took us 2 years of work, quite frankly, to convince member states and EU institutions that carers should be addressed and in this directive, and that new rights should be introduced for carers across Europe. But I'm glad to say that we were successful, and so the directive entered into force in 2019 and introduced a new set of rights for carers, the first one being access to carers leave of 5 working days per year. Unfortunately, member states who now have to transpose the directive in their national or regional legislation don't have to accompany this right with a compensation, financial compensation. So it's a bit short, unfortunately. But I think the most important, as I like to say, the most important word in this directive is the minimum. So this is a minimum set of rights, and we can always go, of course, beyond what the directive stipulates as we work on the transposition with national, regional public authority. The second set of rights introduced by the directive is the need for carers to have access to flexible working arrangements. Now, this one is at the discretion of employers, quite frankly, and so we need also to sit down with employers across Europe via our member organizations to negotiate these rights, but also we should team up with trade unions to make sure these rights are further developed and, of course, implemented. Now, having said that, even though the directive, as you can see, has its flaws, 5 days is not much, it's unpaid. We see this as a breakthrough in our advocacy work for the simple reason that the transposition and the creation of these rights across member states, so in all member states, by 2022, means that informal carers and informal care now has to be defined in the legislation and carers have to be identified as well. And of course, these rights should be promoted. So that means, it has the potential to create a dynamic by which more and more people will recognize themselves as carers, and so we will be able to generate a critical mass of citizens who will push with us for better and enhanced rights and recognition for carers across Europe. Now, in 2018, our network also introduced a proposal for an EU strategy on carers, and the rationale for this EU strategy. Why do that at a European level? Well, that's very simple. First of all, the challenges related to care and caring in Europe are common for all member states. So demographic aging means a growing prevalence of care needs. There's the declining supply of care professionals across member states. There's a sustainability challenge when it comes to the future of care systems also in all member states. And finally, as I demonstrated a few minutes ago, the challenges facing carers are also common in all member states. So there is an added value in at least having a coordinated approach at European level to address all of these issues, while making sure that, of course, the needs and situation of carers are taken into account. So the strategy we proposed actually is, aims to be as simple as possible. So it builds on 10 steps to develop what we consider a carer-friendly policy environment. So as you will see, and on this slide, and you can of course find more information on our website, the 3 first steps focus on the need to have a proper and good quality, so comprehensive definition of care, informal care and informal carers. The second step is about the development of tools to actually identify carers in each country. And so, for example, that includes the need for surveys or for specific questions to be included in national census. But also, for example, it could be, a communication campaign targeted at care professionals, and in particular, primary care actors, to make sure they understand the needs of carers and they are able to respond to their questions when meeting with them, because of course, primary care actors are regularly in contact with not only patients, but their carers. The third step is about the need to develop tools as well and mechanisms for care services, so health and social care services, to assess the needs of carers, not only the care recipient, but also the whole family, including, by the way, young carers when there are young carers involved. And the other steps, as you can see, concern the various support measures that are required. So the need to have good quality interface between informal and professional care, access to information and training, as I mentioned before, a stronger focus on health prevention, health promotion, and disease prevention for carers, access to respite care, access to training, and a focus on work-life balance and poverty among carers. Step 10 is a transversal step, which says basically every policy development with a potential bearing on the daily life of carers should take into account the perspective and the opinion of carers or carers organizations, which incidentally means there should be a carer organization in each country or even region. So I hope this presentation was useful to give you an overview of the situation and needs of carers, but also the entry points that exist to make a difference. We will continue, as far as EuroCarers is concerned, to convey the voice of carers with your help. I mean, the EuroCarers is not about the Secretariat in Brussels, of course. It's a collective effort which builds on the amazing work of our national and regional member organizations. And again, Carers Sweden is a prominent member. So we'd like to thank you for your attention. And I'd like to thank in particular Carers Sweden for the organization of this event. Please don't hesitate to contact us should you require more information or should you have questions about our work. And I wish you a good and interesting conference for the rest of the day. Bye.